The Mojave doesn't do compromises. If you make a mistake out here, the sun digs it up, bakes it dry, and leaves it for the kit foxes to look at. I'm an arid land ecologist. For the last 4 years, my entire life has been measured in soil moisture percentages, battery voltage on solar-powered telemetry units, and the slow, rhythmic hum of my diesel F250 rolling over washboard gravel. I've spent 3 grant cycles tracking how creosote bushes adapt to shifting rainfall patterns. It's quiet work. Most of the time, the only things that talk back to me are the dry wind off the Panamint Range and the occasional rattle of loose gear in the truck bed. I preferred it that way. Silence is predictable. It doesn't ask for explanations, and it doesn't leave when things get difficult. But on a Tuesday morning, in mid-August, the silence broke. I was 40 miles down an abandoned salt flat road, heading toward my first telemetry station in Yucca Flat. The heat index was already pushing 104, and the air above the white ground was warping into a thick, watery mirage. Through the shimmer, I saw something that didn't belong. It was a shape-faded metallic blue and completely still. As I got closer, the shape resolved into a 2008 Toyota Corolla with its hood popped open like a metal jaw. A thin, pathetic wisp of steam was curling out from the engine bay. Sitting on the front bumper, shaded only by the lifted hood, was a young woman. She was wearing a dusty canvas field jacket, heavy hiking boots, and a wide-brimmed straw hat pulled so low I couldn't see her eyes. On her knees was a thick, leather-bound sketchbook. She didn't look up until the rumble of my diesel engine stopped 10 feet from her bumper. I killed the ignition. The silence settled back over the flats, heavy and hot. I stepped out of the truck, the dry heat hitting my face like an open oven door. "You're a long way from a gas station," I said, leaning against my driver's side door. She pushed her hat back with one finger. Her face was flushed from the heat, her dark hair pinned up loosely with a wooden pencil, and her collarbone was smudged with charcoal. But her eyes, bright, pale green, and completely alert, didn't show a hint of panic. "My radiator hose didn't just leak," she said. Her voice was steady, dry, and slightly raspy from the dust. "It split cleanly down the middle. I tried patching it with electrical tape and self-rising silicone wrap, but the pressure blew the seal 3 miles back. The block is dry." I walked over, peered into the engine bay, and gave the top hose a light squeeze. It was a split EPDM rubber line, ruined. "The tape never holds once the system hits 16 psi, I observed. "Not in this heat." "I figured that out about 10 minutes ago when the steam started smelling like hot maple syrup," she replied, closing her sketchbook with a soft thud. "I'm Lily Marcus," I said. "Where were you heading?" "The South Wash near the old mining cabins," she said, pointing toward the rugged red hills 5 miles east. "There's a colony of Eriogonum microthicum slender buckwheat that only blooms in the late summer dry spell. I have a commission from the State Botanical Archive to document the structural variations of the root system before the autumn flash floods bury them." "A botanical illustrator," I said, looking at the pencil in her hair. "You drove a front-wheel drive city car into a salt flat during a heat dome to draw a weed." "It's not a weed," she corrected, her voice taking on a sharp, professional edge. "It's a highly specialized subshrub with a lateral root system that prevents clay erosion. And I didn't plan on the hose splitting." I checked my phone. No service, not even an emergency signal. The nearest town with a towing service was 65 miles of dirt road behind us, and the driver there usually spent his Tuesdays drinking iced tea in his air-conditioned shop, refusing to head out to the flats unless the fee was triple his normal rate. "I have 3 solar stations to service," I said, looking at my watch. "It takes 3 days to complete the loop. I can't turn back now because my funding is tied to a real-time data submission deadline on Friday morning. If I miss it, my lab budget gets frozen." Lily stood up, brushing dry clay from her trousers. She was smaller than she looked sitting down, but she carried herself with a quiet, stubborn posture that told me she wasn't about to beg. I have 2 gallons of water, 3 cans of sardines, and enough heavyweight paper to last a week. I can wait here. In a metal box that's currently turning into an oven? I asked, gesturing to her car. By noon, the interior of that Corolla will hit 140 degrees. If you stay here, you'll be dehydrated by sunset and delirious by morning. She looked at her car, then at the vast shimmering expanse of the white salt flats, and finally at my heavy-duty truck. I had a pressurized 5-gallon water tank mounted to the frame, a camper shell over the bed, and a working air conditioner. I guess I'm riding with you, she said softly. Only if you promise not to complain about the dust, the noise, or the food, I replied, walking to my tailgate to clear a space. I have a strict schedule, Lily. I don't stop for scenic views, and I don't do detours. Deal, she said, hoisting a heavy canvas backpack over her shoulder. As long as you don't mind me drawing your dirt. My dirt has a scientific name, I muttered, but I helped her load her gear into the back anyway. The first hour in the truck was silent. I kept my eyes on the faint double-track trail, watching for sharp volcanic rocks that could slash my 10-pleat tires. The air conditioner hummed, blowing cold air that smelled faintly of cabin filters and old copper. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her sketchbook open on her lap, her hand moving in quick, rhythmic strokes. She wasn't drawing the landscape. She was drawing the cluttered dashboard of my truck, the mounting bracket for my GPS, the dusty radio microphone, the loose washers, rolling in the cup holder. You draw fast, I observed, not looking over. You drive slow, she countered. 20 miles an hour keeps the suspension from snapping. If I break an axle out here, we both become botanical specimens. I'm not criticizing, she said, her pencil scratching softly against the heavy paper. I'm documenting. Your dashboard looks like an archaeological site. There's a layer of white gypsum dust from the North Flats, a layer of red clay from the South Canyons, and 3 different types of dried grease. It's a chronological record of your last 6 months. I glanced at her page. In clean, incredibly detailed graphite lines, she had captured the exact texture of the worn leather on my steering wheel and the tiny crack in the plastic casing of my satellite communicator. It was precise. It wasn't just an artistic interpretation. It was an accurate record. That's actually not bad, I admitted. High praise from a man who measures dirt for a living, she said, a small, dry smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. I don't just measure it. I interpret what it's trying to say. And what is it saying today? It's saying we're in for a dry shift, I said, pointing to the barometer display on my secondary console. The pressure is holding steady, but the relative humidity is down to 4%. That's low, even for the Mojave. The air is hungry. It'll suck the moisture out of anything it touches. We reached Station 1 at Yucca Flat. Around 1 in the afternoon, the station was a 12-foot aluminum mast anchored by 3 heavy guide wires into a concrete pad. Well, it was equipped with an anemometer, a solar panel, and a locked fiberglass enclosure containing the main data logger. I stepped out of the truck, grabbed my Pelican toolkit, and walked toward the mast. The heat hit like a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. Within 30 seconds, my shirt was stuck to my back. Lily followed me out, but she didn't stand around waiting. She carried her backpack to the shade of a large, twisted Joshua tree, about 20 yards away, knelt in the dirt, and began inspecting a small cluster of dry, gray-green leaves tucked near the base of the trunk. Don't touch the soil within 3 feet of that tree, I called out over the wind. I have underground moisture probes buried there. I know what a TDR sensor cable looks like, Marcus, she called back, her head down. And I'm not touching them. I'm looking at Aramalche rotundifolia, desert 5-spot. Or at least, what's left of it. The seed pods are completely desiccated, but the capsule structure is perfectly intact. I knelt by my data logger, opened the fiberglass box, and connected my rugged tablet to the serial port. The download began, a slow progress bar creeping across the screen. While the data transferred, I watched her. She had pulled a small magnifying glass from her pocket and was holding it over a tiny seed pod, her face inches from the dry ground. She didn't seem to care about the dust coating her knees or the sweat dripping from under her straw hat. She was completely focused, her fingers holding the dry stem with a delicacy that looked almost ridiculous in this harsh landscape. "Why do you draw them?" I asked, leaning against the aluminum mast. "Why not just take a high-resolution photo with a macro lens? It would save you the heat stroke." She didn't look up from her magnifying glass. "A camera records everything equally. The speck of dust, the shadow, the dead leaf. Next to the specimen, it doesn't understand what it's looking at. A drawing highlights the diagnostic features. It shows the vascular system of the leaf, the way the stem curves to catch the morning condensation, the specific angle of the seed pods. A drawing is a translation of survival. A camera is just a mirror." I watched the progress bar hit 80%. "A translation of survival," I repeated. "That sounds expensive. Does the state archive actually pay for that?" "Not enough to fix a radiator hose on a Tuesday," she said, finally looking up. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a clean streak through the dust on her cheek. "But enough to keep me out of an office. What about you? Does the university pay you to talk to creosote bushes?" "They pay me to prove that the desert is expanding faster than our climate models predicted," I said, pulling the flash drive from the data logger. "The data doesn't lie. In 10 years, this entire basin will be too dry for even the Joshua trees to reproduce. And then we lose the anchor," I said, closing the box and locking it. "The roots die, the soil turns to active sand, and the wind carries it all the way to the coast. It's a slow-motion collapse. Then we'd better document it while it's still here," she said, her voice dropping its playful tone. She stood up, carefully packing her magnifying glass away. "Station 1 is clear." "Clear," I said. "Let's move. We have 30 miles of washboard before we reach the canyon station." 5:05 in the evening, the sun had dropped behind the high western peaks, throwing long, cool blue shadows across the valley floor. The temperature plummeted from a blistering 106 down to a much more tolerable 85. We made camp in a narrow canyon near the base of the Soda Mountains. The canyon walls were steep, made of ancient dark basalt that had spent the day absorbing heat and was now radiating a gentle warmth like a thermal blanket. I set up my sleeping cot on the flat gravel bed next to the truck. I liked sleeping under the stars. The desert sky at night was a massive clear vault of black glass salted with more stars than most people could believe existed. Lily sat on the tailgate of my truck, her boots dangling, eating a can of sardines with a small titanium spork she had pulled from her bag. "You're not eating your stroganoff," she observed, pointing to the unopened, freeze-dried meal sitting on my toolbox. "I'm waiting for the stove to cool down," I said, adjusting the tension on my cot canvas. "Besides, I'm not that hungry." "You've been driving and hauling gear for 8 hours," she said, throwing a small piece of sardine to a tiny desert kangaroo rat that had emerged from the rocks. "You need the calories." "Or is this part of your solemn, lonely scientist routine?" "It's not a routine," I said, sitting on the edge of my cot. "It's just how I work. The less gear I use, the less there is to clean, pack, and repair tomorrow morning." "You're very efficient," she said, "and very defensive." "I'm practical." "No, you're guarded," she said, her green eyes catching the pale twilight. "There's a difference. Practical means you carry 2 spare tires. Guarded means you sleep on a canvas cot 10 feet away, from the only other human within 50 miles, because you don't want to risk sharing a conversation. I looked at her. She was sitting there, covered in dust, her hair messy, eating cheap canned fish, and she was entirely comfortable. She didn't have the restless, anxious energy of the students the university sometimes sent out with me, the ones who couldn't go 10 minutes without checking their blank screens or complaining about the lack of ice. "I've been out here alone for a long time, Lily," I said quietly. "You get used to the space. You get used to not having to adjust your pace for anyone else." She nodded, her expression softening. She set her empty can aside and leaned back against the truck's camper shell. "My father was a surveyor," she said. "He used to take me into the Oregon high desert when I was a kid. He told me that the desert doesn't make people lonely. It just makes them visible. In the city, you can hide behind the noise and the crowds. Out here, there's nothing to hide behind. You're just you." I didn't answer. I lay back on my cot, hands behind my head, looking up at the first stars appearing in the deep purple sky. The wind was low, a soft, warm breath through the canyon. "Hey, Marcus," she whispered after a long silence. "Yeah?" "Thanks for not leaving me in the car." "The stroganoff would have been too salty to eat alone anyway," I muttered. I heard her laugh, a soft, clean sound that echoed slightly off the basalt walls before the desert silence claimed it again. Day 2 began at 5 in the morning. The air was crisp, almost cold, smelling of dry stone and damp sage. We drank instant coffee out of metal mugs, the steam rising straight up in the still air. By 7, we were back on the trail, heading toward Station 2. The road was worse here, climbing out of the flat basin into a series of rugged, red dirt hills that had been carved by ancient water flows. The truck's suspension groaned as we crossed deep, sandy washes. "The wind is shifting," I said, watching the weather monitor. "It's coming from the south-southwest. Now that means Gulf moisture is trying to push north." "Is that bad?" Lily asked, her pencil poised over her sketchbook. "It means instability," I said. "When that hot, dry air off the flats meets the moist air from the south, it creates a shear line. If the pressure drops too fast, we'll get a habuba dust storm. It can roll over the ridge in minutes, reducing visibility to less than 3 feet. How long do we have?" "If the barometer holds, we should have until this afternoon," I said, pushing the truck a little faster through the gravel wash. "But I want to hit Station 2 and get to the shelter of the canyon before it drops." Station 2 was located on an exposed ridge overlooking the salt flats. When we arrived, the wind was already picking up, carrying a fine, stinging grit that rattled against the truck's windows. As soon as I stepped out, I saw the problem. The solar panel on the mast was crooked. One of the mounting brackets had sheared off, likely during a high wind event the week before, and the panel was hanging by its electrical leads, banging against the metal pole with a loud metallic clang. "The battery is at 12%, I said, checking my tablet. "If the panel isn't charging, the transmitter will shut down by tonight. I have to replace the bracket and resolder the lead. Can you do it in this wind?" Lily asked. She had pulled her collar up around her neck and was holding her straw hat down with one hand. "I have to," I said. "If the transmitter goes dark, the data chain is broken and my project is non-compliant." I grabbed my safety harness, a spare aluminum bracket, and my butane soldering iron from the truck bed. The wind was gusting up to 30 miles an hour now, whistling through the empty structures of the weather instruments. I climbed the small utility ladder, clipping my harness to the mast. The metal was hot, even in the wind, and the pole swayed slightly with each gust. "Marcus," Lily called from the ground. "The sky to the south is turning orange." I looked over my shoulder. Far across the basin, a massive wall of dust was rising from the desert floor. It looked like a solid moving mountain range of red-brown clay. its top edge lit by the high sun, its base swallowing the road we had just traveled. It was moving fast, faster than I'd expected. "How long?" I shouted down. "Based on the dust speed and the ridgeline, 15 minutes, maybe less," she called back. Her voice was remarkably calm, her eyes squinting against the rising grit. "You need to get down." "I have to finish this connection," I said, my fingers shaking slightly as I tried to align the tiny solder wire with the copper terminal. The wind kept blowing out the butane flame before the tip could heat up. "I can't get the solder to pool. The wind is too fast." Suddenly a shadow fell over me. Lily had climbed the first 3 rungs of the ladder. She wasn't wearing a harness, but she had wrapped her arm securely around the vertical support beam. In her free hand, she held her canvas backpack, holding it up like a shield against the wind right next to the solar panel. "Is that better?" she asked, her teeth gritted against the dust. Her backpack blocked the wind perfectly, creating a small pocket of dead air right around the terminal box. "You shouldn't be up here without a harness," I said, even as I brought the soldering iron back to the wire. "Then solder faster," she replied. I didn't argue. I touched the hot tip to the copper. The solder melted, flowing smoothly over the joint, sealing the connection in 3 seconds. I pulled the iron away, checked the battery indicator on my wrist display charging, and then grabbed my tools. "Down!" I said. We scrambled down the ladder just as the first cold gust of the storm hit the ridge. The wind roared a deep, hollow sound that flattened the low scrub and turned the sun into a pale, ghostly white disk. "Inside the cab!" I yelled, grabbing her arm. We dived into the truck, slamming the doors just as the main wall of dust hit us. Instantly, the world disappeared. The windshield went from a view of the vast red hills to a solid, swirling sheet of orange-brown grit. The wind hit the truck's side panels like a physical fist, shaking the heavy F-250 on its suspension. The air inside the cab instantly filled with the dry, electrostatic smell of dust. I turned the ventilation system to recirculate, shutting out the external air, and killed the engine. The sound of the wind was immense, a constant, deafening roar that made the metal panels of the truck hum. We sat in the dim orange light of the cab, our breathing loud in the enclosed space. Lily took off her hat, shaking a layer of fine red dust from the brim. Her face was covered in a thin, dry film of clay, her eyelashes coated in white powder. She looked over at me, her green eyes incredibly bright against the dirt on her face. "That," she said, her voice dry and slightly breathless, "was a very precise piece of soldering." I looked at my hands. They were covered in grease, solder flux, and red dust. I began to laugh. It wasn't my usual quiet chuckle. It was a deep, ragged laugh of pure relief. "You're crazy," I said, leaning back against my headrest. "You climbed an unanchored ladder during a haboob warning to hold a backpack." "It's a very sturdy backpack," she said, her own small smile breaking through the dust on her face. "And I have a lot of expensive paper in there." I couldn't let it get wet if the storm turned to rain. "It doesn't rain during a haboob," I said. "It's too dry." "Well, now I know that," she said, leaning her head back against her seat. "Consider it a botanical translation of safety." For the next 6 hours, the storm held us hostage. The interior of the truck grew warm and quiet, insulated from the worst of the roar by the heavy doors. The light remained a strange, twilight orange, casting long, soft shadows across the dashboard. We didn't talk about data or botany. We talked about how we ended up out here in the empty corners of the world. "My mother wanted me to do architectural drafting," Lily said, her fingers tracing a pattern in the dust on the glove compartment. "She said it was stable. She said buildings don't change their minds or die in a freeze." But I hated the straight lines. I hated the clean, white paper that had no history on it. A plant, A plant is a record of everything that ever happened to it. If it was a dry year, the leaves are smaller and thicker. If there was a fire, the bark is dark. It's like a diary written in cellulose. I understand that, I said. My father was an accountant. He lived in spreadsheets. He liked that every column balanced at the end of the day. I think I inherited his need for balance, but I couldn't stand the office walls. I wanted to see the balance working in real time. The way a single creosote bush can live for 2,000 years by self-cloning, adjusting its root zone to match the rainfall over centuries. It's a perfect calculation. It's beautiful. She looked at me, her gaze steady and thoughtful. That's the first time you've used the word beautiful since we met. Marcus, I was beginning to think your vocabulary was limited to gypsum and barometer. The vocabulary matches the terrain, I said, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the truck's heater. The terrain is changing, she whispered, looking out the side window at the swirling dust. And so are we. She reached out, her hand resting on the center console between us. Her fingers were small, her nails short and clean, despite the dirt, and her palm was dry. I hesitated for a second, my old guarded habits screaming at me to keep the distance, to stay inside my safe, predictable circle. But the desert was gone, replaced by a wall of orange dust. There was no one else out here. There was only the roar of the wind and the warmth of her hand. I turned my hand over my fingers, closing around hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her skin warm and dry. We sat like that in the dim, dusty cabin for a long time, listening to the mountain move outside, our hands holding on to the only stable thing left in the valley. By midnight, the wind finally died down. The dust settled back to the earth, leaving the air incredibly clear and cold. I opened my door and stepped out into the night. The desert had been completely rearranged. The double-track road was gone, buried under a smooth white sheet of fresh gypsum sand that looked like snow under the bright desert moon. The air was clean, smelling of ozone and wet dust. "It's beautiful," Lily said, stepping out beside me. She had wrapped her canvas jacket tightly around her shoulders against the midnight chill. "The wind washed it clean," I said. "We have to find our own track now." "That's the easy part," she said, looking up at the sky. The stars didn't move. On the third day, we reached Station 3, near the base of the Panamint Range. The data retrieval was clean, the solar array was intact, and my tablet confirmed the successful upload of the entire 3-day dataset to the university database. My grant was safe, my funding was secured for another year. But as I packed the tools back into my Pelican case, I didn't feel the usual sense of quiet relief. I felt a strange, lingering weight in my chest. The loop was finished. We were heading back to the highway, back to the town where her car would be towed, back to our separate, predictable lives. We drove back along the newly formed sand ridges, the truck tire tracks, the only marks on the pristine white salt flats. We reached the main highway by 3 in the afternoon. The asphalt looked strange, too black, too straight, too clean. The sound of other cars, passing loud, fast, and indifferent, shattered the 3 days of quiet we had built. I pulled into the dirt lot of the small tow yard in Baker. Her blue Corolla was already parked near the chain-link fence, its split radiator hose replaced with a shiny new black rubber line. Courtesy of the local mechanic, I had radioed from the high ridge. "She's ready to go," the mechanic said, wiping his greasy hands on a red rag as he walked out of the office. $85 for the hose and the coolant. I reached for my wallet, but Lily was already handing him a crisp $100 bill. "I pay for my own mistakes," she said to the mechanic with a small, polite smile. He took the bill, nodded, and walked back to his shop, leaving us standing in the dusty lot next to her small car. "Well," I said, my hands in my pockets, "you have your car back. The road to the South Wash is clear now." The dust storm cleared out the loose sand. "And you have your data," she said, her green eyes looking at me from under the brim of her straw hat. "The university will be happy." "Yes," I said. She stood there for a moment, her leather-bound sketchbook held against her chest. She looked toward the high red mountains we had just left, the peaks still shimmering in the afternoon heat haze. "I took some notes," she said quietly. Opening the book to a page near the back, she turned the book toward me. It wasn't a drawing of a plant. It was a drawing of me seen from behind, climbing the aluminum mast of Station 2 during the storm. My safety harness tight, my hand holding the soldering iron against the wild sky. In the corner of the page, she had written the exact coordinates of the station, the wind speed, and a small neat note. "Marcus, arid-land ecologist. Highly efficient under pressure." "It's a documentation of survival," she said, her voice dropping its playful edge. "In case the university needs proof." I looked at the drawing, then at her face. The dust was gone, her skin was clean, but she still had that same stubborn, beautiful focus in her eyes. "I have another station loop in 3 weeks," I said, my voice slightly rough. "The North Flats. The terrain is rougher, and the telemetry systems are older. I'll need someone to check the vegetation cover near the rain gauges. The university has a small budget for a field assistant. No comfort clauses, no paved roads, and the food is terrible." Lily closed her book, her smile coming slowly, bright and alive in the hot parking lot. "Only if you promise not to complain about my sketches," she said. "That," I said, reaching out to take her bag, "is a very easy promise to keep." We loaded her gear back into my truck. This time, we didn't use the tailgate as a boundary. We sat side by side in the cab, the air conditioner humming, the GPS screen glowing with a new route that led straight back into the deep, quiet heart of the Mojave. The desert was still hot, still dry, and still completely indifferent to our plans. But as we turned off the pavement and onto the dusty dirt track, the silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like the space between two lines of a drawing that was finally starting to make sense.